Great. Well, let's jump right in. Um, welcome to the hello everyone, and welcome to the Mindful Mona Lisa interview. I'm Max Herman, and today we are talking with Ken Burns, the celebrated filmmaker and documentarian whose next film is about Leonardo da Vinci and will premiere this November 18th and 19th. Ken, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I feel compelled at the outset to put an asterisk. This film is also directed by Sarah Burns and David McMahon. Sarah is my oldest daughter. David is my son-in-law. And they're also the writers as well as producers with me and Tim McAleer. And the film is in every regard equally theirs. So when I speak, if I make a mistake, I'm speaking for myself. If I'm actually saying something that's meaningful, I'm speaking for all of them.
Understood. This was a fabulous collaboration and team effort, and I think it was wonderfully done in that regard.
Thank you.
You mentioned my background. I don't know if you've recognized this. This is from the Codex Atlanticus,
Yes.
520, and this is a crazy kind of a picture, but I like it very much. I'm fond of these kinds of pages from his notebooks.
I think we focus too much on Leonardo as sort of this proto-inventor who invented the airplane and the helicopter and the this and the that, and that a lot of these things were fanciful and never built and couldn't have worked at his time. And he knew that more than anybody else and anyone else that's followed. What I think is most interesting are the fanciful explorations, this kind of open, restless, curious, interrogating mind and eye, and that's where the sheer volume, as Cardinal Aragona's assistant said, an infinity of pages is what we're so drawn to.
I strongly agree, and that sets up my first question really well. The film is wonderful. It's highly immersive and cinematic. It's visually rich, but it's also deeply literary and historical, bringing in Leonardo's voluminous writings and the Italian culture of his time. It's also very scientific, at times philosophical, and as viewers, we vividly experience all these branches of his work as if through Leonardo's own eyes and perspective. The unique style of the film brings the diversity of Leonardo's interests all together holistically to depict, using his own phrase, the motions of his mind. Can you talk about how this very innovative filmmaking style helps unify and knit together the myriad art forms and the curiosity across disciplines that shaped Leonardo's intellectual journey and his life experience?
So first of all, thank you. And I will be sure to convey to particularly Sarah and Dave your kind comments about it, and the fact that I think you have gathered in all of the threads. Process for us, and I think probably also for Leonardo on an entirely different level, is everything. And a film is itself a million, no exaggeration, problems. If you see problems pejoratively, you shouldn't be in film. But if you see them sort of positively, things to be overcome, inertia to be, changed, friction to be met with, then you've got it. So solutions presented themselves. This is, very much in our traditional style. That is to say, it has a third person narrator, but that's not enough for us. We need to have the first person voice, in this case, of Leonardo himself, to sort of balance it out and complement it. And therefore, it allows us to embrace all of the aspects that you describe, a spiritual, a philosophical, scientific, an artistic thing, and to do it in the same breath. Now, in order to do that, we also have to be liberated from our own, I would say, limitations of presentation by allowing us to split the screen into maybe two, maybe three, maybe four, maybe six, maybe nine images, to use modern things. This is the most modern person I've ever come across. And so many of the things that he understood without the benefit of telescope or microscope, just with his eye, are things that took 500 years, 450 years to be verified by modern science. Until we had MRIs, we didn't know how absolutely correct he was about the working of the various chambers of the heart and the valves there. But there he was. He'd done it 475 years before. It's astonishing. And so we had to liberate our own style. And so this is a rich, rich mind. Maybe I back up and say the cliche is, of course, that humans basically use 10% of their brain. If that's true, if the cliche is in any way accurate, I have no way of knowing, then Leonardo might be using 75% of his brain. And it's an inspirational thing, but it then requires us as filmmakers to expand. And to Sarah and Dave's credit, what they did is they moved to Florence and they basically exploded while keeping the structure of how we've presented films. And we've worked together on the Central Park Five and biographies of Jackie Robinson and Muhammad Ali. We kept the structure of that, the narrator of that, but we also exploded, much like his drawings and his exploded machines, the idea to just give our audience a sense of the rapture that can come from engaging all of those things at once. More often than not, particularly in history, and I'm a filmmaker, first of all, I'm not trained in history. I just happen to work in American history, and it's mostly about story. I'm a storyteller. Is that the Academy has always been drawn to particular fashions of historiography. Narrative fell out of fashion after we dropped an atomic bomb and killed 65 million other human beings, understandably, replaced sometimes by Freudian interpretation, later by Marxist economic determinist things, by symbolism, by deconstruction, by postmodernism, by queer studies, by Afrocentrism, and all of them are legitimate ways in. And we found that going to a more complex form of narrative, you can engage all of the spokes of the wheel. If your object is to get to the hub, if you go in on one spoke, you're not necessarily seeing all the other ways of understanding. And so this is for us of any film we've done as most about engaging as many modes of inquiry as possible, which is our modus operandi for 45 years, but I think finds a different set of sort of successes in a film about Leonardo, just because he pulls us to be better. He demands that we be smarter. He asks us to see things from many different perspectives. I mean, this is a guy who has probably done the first landscape picture drawing in Western art. He is the first person to do an aerial view of a place. He has got all of these fantastic machines, real and imagined. He's got only 20 paintings, half of which are finished, the other half aren't. And they are among the most important works of art in the history of the world. And he obviously, whether you like Rembrandt or Cezanne or Picasso or whatever, it doesn't matter. Without a doubt, he's painted the most famous painting in the world. And I'd love to, because this is the subject of your, let's just leave, let's let her be what she is and not the joke. We don't have to be Marcel Duchamp and draw a mustache and a goatee on her, nor do we have to make a joke about the smile, because he has told us what all of this means. And it is so much more important. And we can get to these larger human questions that he is constantly asking himself and nature to yield its secrets, to yield its truths. And so way too long an answer, but Max,
No,
it's just exactly, he just fit into our wheelhouse, and he just inspired us in ways that are constant and continual and will for the rest of my life.
I couldn't agree more. And my interest was actually prompted by visiting Florence and just you say about the perspectives that are opened up. That's leads into his disciple of experience quote. It's written above my head here, but the little fragment, it's two. There's those three lines above and then three below that curling form. But the first part of it reads, body born of the perspective of Leonardo da Vinci, disciple of experience. So it's from his perspective, which is omnidirectional, really. And it's so fascinating. It draws you in. I have 800,000 questions about Leonardo, like on note cards. And so But jumping forward, about Disciple of Experience, uh, experience wasn't just Leonardo's personal style or his instinctive approach to life and work. It was also a key word and rigorous concept. In his writings, frequently a very specific philosophical principle, often personified, frequently representing his highest ideals as an artist and scientist. You seem to allude to this in the title of part one of the film by quoting his description of himself as a disciple of experience. Um, the Italian word esperienza means both experience and experiment, linking it to art and science. And the film explores how art and science for Leonardo are not separate pursuits, but a single unified organic entity. Um, as Guillermo del Toro says in the film, knowledge and imagination are intimately related. Why do you think Leonardo chose to dedicate himself to being a disciple of experience? And why was this commitment so fundamental for him?
Well, this is the smartest question that anyone has ever asked. It's so it's so central to whom he is. First of all, this is a kid who is born out of wedlock, and so he basically spends time not with father or mother, but with relatives. And he's in Vinci, which is a rural area west of Florence, and it's nature is his first teacher. Nature is his teacher throughout his life, and so he is seeing these things. He's asking these fundamental questions of the perfection that he sees and I believe exists in nature. It does nothing superfluous, as one of our commentators said. It's about everything in nature is for a reason. And it sort of contrasts itself with the crudeness and the sort of spurious aspects of human engagement, right? So he's animated by that. He inherits a priori a Western tradition, which is about observation. This is coming from Aristotle and so the main thing is to look and see and observe. But as you quite correctly point out, is that the word experience in Italian is rooted in experiment. And so what the Renaissance, of which he is very much, if not the epitome of, certainly one of the major manifestations of it, which is the opening up from the Dark Ages, from the medieval times, through trade to other cultures. And so there's a connection to the East, but also to the Muslim world. And they're experimenters. They are experimenters and mathematicians. And so you have in him this sort of embracing of this world that has just expanded exponentially from the narrow views of what had been before. And so it allows him, say, in one area where you would, as painters get, a commission from a church or from a patron to do a familiar biblical scene, he's going to do the Virgin, the Madonna and Child in a whole nother way. The Virgin and the Rocks is this exploded humanistic idea in which two things can happen at the same time. And so what you begin to see in this capacious mind is this ability to hold and tolerate the contradictions that are, of course, part of all of human existence, and to, at the same time, as Guillermo says, just interrogate the universe, ask it what its mysteries are. Where am I from? Who am I? What is my purpose here? How, where do I go? How does water behave? Why are there fossils up in the mountains? How does mist form? What happens with the flights of birds? I mean, by the end of his life, you begin to realize, as your excellent question also had a part, is that there are no categories, right? There's only one, it, all things. And so you can look at the Mona Lisa, and it's a great work of science, and you can look at his scientific dissection. They're great works of art, but that's meaningless. We've already imposed an unnecessary complication and dialectic to something that doesn't need it. And so he is all these things at once. And while, even PBS is promoting this, scientist, inventor, anatomist, and sure, but none of those job descriptions, he's a human being. And he is reminding us that we can be so much more than we are if we get rid of the labels. I made a film, this will sound ridiculous, coming after the or absurd after coming after the sublime contemplation. But I made a film on country music, and commerce and convenience insists that, oh, there's a silo called country, there's a silo called jazz, and there's a silo called R&B or soul, there's rap, there's classical, there's folk. No, there are no silos. There's no borders. And I think um, he is fortunate at being born out of wedlock insofar as he is not compelled to follow in his father, who's a notary, accountant, kind of lawyery guy, into the university. He cannot do that, but he can do everything else. And so he begins to realize that he is a man without letters, as he puts it in Italian. He is not a scholar, but he actually surpasses all scholarship to that point. And when he finally gets the perfect patron, he's basically saying, I want you, Leonardo, the way Alexander needed Aristotle. I want you to just be yourself and tell me. It ends up being the perfect patron after lots of give and take and disappointments to patrons and abandoning works and not delivering, including not delivering the most famous painting on earth, which is commissioned by a wealthy silk merchant from Florence who wanted a portrait of his then 24-year-old wife, Lisa Gioconda, who had already had 5 kids. And, and what he did was, a kind of Rosetta Stone of human existence, if not the Rosetta Stone to the universe. And this is a guy who doesn't have a microscope and doesn't have a telescope, as I said, and yet perceives the macro and the micro at the same time. That we can all now, benefiting from both those instruments, say there is a profound similarity in the architecture of an atom and the architecture of the solar system. We can see that as above, so below. But he got it with just this thing, his eye, and you know,
Yeah, and his imagination as well.
imagination, very important. And Guillermo's right that knowledge and imagination come hand in hand. And what we've done is, particularly in our academic, adopting a Germanic, I don't want to blame it on the Germans, but a Germanic academic model at the end of the 19th century made specialism what it was about. And so you educate only one thing, a blind man describing one part of the elephant. And the description is perfectly applicable, but it doesn't get the whole elephant. And like, how do you get the whole elephant? Well, you have to act and behave a little bit more like Leonardo and shed the expectations of the academy in this case. And I don't want to single them out because there's so much myopia in the world, in politics and in art and in every sort of sphere of human endeavor. We lie all the time. That you find his um, refreshing pursuit of the truth just liberating.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm uh kind of laughing at Chester back there, who's relaxing. And
My
uh,
executive producer, yeah.
yeah, they're great. They remind us to just, keep it real kind of. But
So,
um
so, so there are some folks who've said that dogs and cats are God's experiment in love. That we we're so imperfect that we haven't figured out how to love each other. So we love our pets, and maybe something rubs off in the way we treat other people, right?
oh yeah, they teach us all every day.
Yeah.
Um so I think my next question does get to this point of taking uh that that most famous painting seriously.
Yeah.
Um the main focus of my blog, The Mindful Mona Lisa, is a novel hypothesis um, that the Mona Lisa and other images by Leonardo may have allegorical, literary, and philosophical levels of meaning that correspond to his writings about esperienza. For example, when he personifies this principle in the preface to his treatise on painting and declares, "As maestra, I will acknowledge her, and in every case call her as evidence." I find it natural or even inevitable to ask whether he may have incorporated any of Esperienza's attributes in the visual language of La Gioconda. However, I was surprised to find that this hypothesis has not been explored in the past by previous scholarship. As a filmmaker, as well as a student of history, and as you have said, now a friend of Leonardo, Do you believe he had the kind of modern versatility and expressive range capable of interweaving layers of narrative, allegory, or philosophy into his visual art in ways that during his lifetime would have been completely unprecedented?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, if you could just take The Virgin and the Rocks, in which he has taken a familiar scene of the Madonna and Child and given her both her timeless role in the world, which is to bear the Son of God and to accept his future death, that in this remarkable painting he is seeing all of that stuff, but she's also has the maternal, the human instinct. This is what the Renaissance is doing, is it's centering humanness in a what has been heretofore at least a church-centered, in Italy, a church-centered view of everything. And so he's taking a familiar moment, but when John the Baptist, who is also a baby, is sort of reaching out to Christ, and Christ is blessing him, and she's trying to restrain John, and she's trying to reach with her other hand to her son and can't. This is the mother and the human instinct. This is transcended. I think he invented cinema with The Last Supper. I mean, this is not just a frozen moment. This is a frozen 8 or 9 seconds. And so it's moving. How did that happen? And then when you get to the Gioconda, and I'll start to cry. I mean, this is it. This is the Rosetta Stone of the human experience. And Vasari, who is rhapsodizing about it, sort of drops down and just says, "But I can see her heart beating, and I can see the blood flowing through her veins in this somato of her technique of her neck." And he's so good at that. And then you realize with the scholar Francesca Borgo, who basically says this is not just a person who's taken painting from a craft, but to this grand philosophical position, but he has taken an inanimate thing and animated her. If Vasari can see the pulse there, then he is himself, as she says, a painter god, which gives the second episode of our film, the concluding episode, its title as well. And that is so profound that we can now never once make another joke about her enigmatic smile. We can never, like Marcel Duchamp, draw the mustache and the goatee. We can only understand that in that smile is contained all of the things you're talking about: the observation and the experiment, the experienza, the sort of the fact that it's a female, and he's the paintings and his ability to bring the female form to life, not just as they're traditionally looking sidewards. He gives them full agency over their lives and their thoughts, and you can see the complexity of their characters behind them. And let me just perhaps proclaim a kind of heresy, but I don't know why God creates the non-reproducing part of the species first. I don't think he does, or she does. I think he understands that the stories, the mythologies that we've told themselves have been incomplete and have slighted, in the case of women, 50% of what the story is about. And so with this painting of the young wife of a prosperous silk merchant is everything. And the background, his understanding, he's putting these complex backgrounds in, everything about her hands, the hair, the texture of the skin, everything reflects the kind of natural world. And you begin to see that. I mean, he once said that the painter was the child of nature, or more precisely, the grandchild of nature. And in that is not just an observation, it's a motivation and a kind of declaration of principles. That is to say, it is our obligation as human beings to take this raw material. Maybe it's just taking a tomato off the vine and making a great sauce and making it more than a tomato, right? And this is our human obligation. And usually we're passive and everything happens to us. And he is asking us to engage in nature and to engage our senses and to ask the difficult questions. And if you're Leonardo, then, I mean, and this is a once in a 10,000 years phenomenon of a human being, he's going to give us a kind of codex of life, right? And I would submit, Your Honor, as states evidence A, the Gioconda, as if you're gonna do that, let's
Yeah.
let's ask her to help us interpret the greatest mysteries of all mysteries, which is what is our humanity? What is our place? I mean, every part of that tension of that question is reflected in her expression and in her body and in her background and in the atmosphere. It's just, I could go on and rhapsodize about it
Oh,
for
I could too. And I would say for 5 years, I have spoken without pause to anyone who would listen about that painting. And I was struck very much by Professor Borgo saying, if we are going to take this painting seriously, because to a great extent we have not. But I do want to shift quickly to one final question, if that's okay.
course. Yeah, and I'm sorry for running on and on and on, but
No, I love the
Emerson talked about a mind on fire. Leonardo's, thanks to Sarah and Dave mostly, have lit my mind on fire.
yeah, I was really surprised how interested I would get, because I do not have a background in art history or the Renaissance or the medieval period, but there's so much that's so modern and so
So
vivid.
modern. That's the thing. And my joke is that one of his neighbors is Amerigo Vespucci, and the entire Western Hemisphere, the north, the big two continents there are named after the first name of his neighbor. So I'm like, okay, so maybe he's the first American. And who's he named after? He can't be named after the traditional family names. He's named after a patron saint of freedom. And then you go, who then codified that in feeble and not so perfect attempts, but at least tried, which is the greatest experiment of
Yeah,
human organization, which is
yeah,
the States of America. So, I haven't really left the subject matter.
no, and that takes me exactly to the final question here. After realizing how fundamental Esperienza is in Leonardo's work, I wondered if similar ideas might have influenced the early origins of democratic thought in the United States. Um, in, in fact, I found the concept of experience appears prominently in major works by multiple framers.
Franklin.
Franklin mentions it several times. But the most compelling example I've found is in the Federalist Papers, where Hamilton specifically appeals to experience in both the opening sentence and the closing paragraph of that historic argument in favor of the Union and the Constitution. If we consider Leonardo, that he created a kind of encyclopedic map or universal atlas, not just of geography or astronomy, but integrating all the modern sciences and all the arts, including the microcosm and the macrocosm. And if he intended this body of work to help guide us toward a sustainable modernity rather than a catastrophic one, should we therefore apply his concept of esperienza to constitutional democracy by thinkers like Franklin and Hamilton, and perhaps later authors like Emerson, William James, John Dewey, and others?
Yeah, John Muir, Henry David Thoreau, absolutely. So you come right back to my final rationale. His work is unpublished, so they're not able to distill the Enlightenment Renaissance thinking of Leonardo in the lifetime. A painting might be known or not known, but they're arriving at the same things. In the Declaration, Jefferson writes, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. He is saying that heretofore, all people have been subjects, and we are inventing something else. We are inventing a citizen that has new requirements necessary for it. And this is in his second sentence, the last mysterious phrase is not so mysterious. The pursuit of happiness is not the acquisition of things in a marketplace of objects, but it's lifelong learning in a marketplace of ideas. To be a virtue, to be a citizen is to require to be virtue. To be virtuous is to learn all the time and to improve oneself. Everybody felt that. John Adams said, I study war and politics in order that my sons study commerce and industry, that my grandchildren study science and music, right? I mean, arts and music. This is what the pursuit of happiness means. And so what you have in the creation of the United States is a reminder that we can take this experience and transform it for the good of all people. Now, of course, when he wrote it, he meant all white men of property free of debt, but we've expanded that. The vagueness of the language has allowed us to, like Leonardo's drawings, have an exploded view of what that means. And that's terrific. And we're in pursuit of happiness, right? It's a process, just as we are in a more perfect union. It ain't perfect. It's the journey towards perfection. And so all of this, whether inspired directly by Leonardo or not, fits in exactly with his worldview and what the Enlightenment coming out of the Renaissance has brought, and what Jefferson, with all his flaws, to his credit, distills into that second sentence of the Declaration. But just remember, we have always been subjects and we're now something else. And so everybody else has tried every other form of government and it doesn't work except this one, as it flawed and imperfect as it is. And it's a real uh-oh when somebody's saying, oh, well, let's try this thing again. No, it doesn't work. It requires a kind of virtue without venality, a kind of honor without hypocrisy. It requires a kind of sacrifice without self-indulgence, and it requires a discipline without dissipation. And the United States is a perfect example, though they probably were in different rooms and didn't hear each other, of people arriving at the same idea. And in the case of Leonardo, putting it into this lifetime of achievement, and in the hands of the founders, Franklin particularly, but also, as you say, Hamilton and Jefferson and Madison and others, creating a machine which they said would go of itself. They wanted to create a machine that would go of itself. And it takes me right back to Leonardo and his, perpetual motion machines and his ideas for this, all of them fanciful, all of them not going to work, but you got to try, right? I mean, none of us get out of this alive, Max. None of us do. There's not an exception going to be made in your or my case, and we're going to live forever. And so we could understandably be sitting in a fetal position on the floor, but we don't. We write symphonies, we tend gardens, we raise children, we make documentary films, we paint paintings. It's all to keep, as Wynton Marsalis said to me, the wolf from the door. And so when you have somebody like a Leonardo or an opportunity like the creation of the United States, you've got the tools to live a virtuous life and to be in pursuit all your life of that ultimately unattainable perfection of the Constitution and the happiness of the Declaration.
Well, that's a wonderful just kind of phrasing there, I think, to end on. I'm not sure if we have a hard stop, Emmett, at this exact moment, or if we should close it there. I think it's a wonderful spot.
Yeah, this has been such a wonderful conversation, Max. So stimulating and so engaging and so thoughtful. And your questions are so rich and deep and complex. And it forces me back to the, original impulses, feelings and thoughts I had about the film and working on the film. And now as a finished film, what it's saying and doing that is more disciplined and more rigorous than the usual blah blah about promoting a film. That just, this one happens to be about Leonardo, the next one is about the American Revolution.
Well, I think it's going to really will just provide a wonderful platform for conversation. I think that's a very American and kind of an Enlightenment kind of a something the framers engaged with, but this
Yes.
great conversation that really does not hold back and really expands outward. I think the film will absolutely fuel that type of interest in Leonardo and that just embrace of Leonardo, I would say. So I'm looking forward to some really fun conversations in the months ahead.
Yeah. It hopes that we can light some more people on fire about who this person is and what, more importantly, what each individual can do to just enrich their own lives, because that's the project.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And Emmett, I don't know if I need to do anything.
No, that was great. We'll be in touch, and thank you both.
Great. It was wonderful, Max. I hope our paths cross, not virtually at some point. Really want to shake your hand and thank you for your thoughtfulness.
I as well. Thank you so much, Ken.
Great. Thanks, Emmett.
Take care.
Yes,
Bye-bye.